Hello and welcome to episode 4 of series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who came back to us on our request on the last episode for potential guests. We've had a few people who've come forward and offered us their knowledge and wisdom to share with our listeners. So if you're interested in being a guest on the show, please let me know. Please get in touch via our contact form at engagingic.com. Or failing that, you can drop me an email at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Tell us a little bit about what your topic might be, what you're interested in, what you'd like to talk about, and we can arrange a call with you, a preliminary call, where we can just discuss that, and that will be in advance of arranging a date for an interview. The interview process normally takes about an hour. We do it all online, so very easy to do, very easy to take part, and give it a go. Let us know what you'd like to talk about, and as I say, we'll have a chat with you just to make sure you're right for the show, and also that you feel comfortable with the process that we'll go through. Just a quick heads up on what's coming up on the next couple of episodes. On the next episode, which is going out on the 28th of February, I've got an interview with Shelby Scarborough. Shelby is from a company called Practical Protocol, LLC. Shelby has a huge amount of experience in internal communications in general, PR. She worked with the Ronald Reagan's team with the Gorbachev Summit in the 1980s, has a huge amount of experience in a lot of fields, very, very, very extensive experience. And Shelby's going to be talking all about the importance of civility and politeness, which is a very interesting topic. And we had a great conversation. I think you'll find that a really interesting interview. And the fortnight after that, on the 14th of March, we have an interview with Mark Carpenter. Mark's going to be telling us all about how we can use stories to teach, lead, and inspire in our internal communications. Storytelling is really popular. We've covered it before in the show, but it's one of those topics that I think you can't cover too many times. It's something that we're all trying to do with our internal comms, is to create an interesting narrative for our employees that is engaging and stimulating. So that's what Mark's going to be telling us all about in the episode on the 14th of March. If you're interested in any of our free webinars, we're running webinars every month at the moment. They alternate between our program. Our program alternates between our health and safety webinar, which is all about how we can make our health and safety communications more interesting and more engaging. And we're also running on alternate months our webinar, which is all about how we can help our leaders to share the big picture with our employees so that they can see how everything, our strategies or our actions, all of our KPIs fit together. So if you go onto our website, thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, go to our events tab, you'll see both of those events listed, and you can choose a date that works for you. So I'm not going to say any more. We're going to move straight into this episode's interview. In and amongst the interviews that we have with practitioners who are working internal comms, I like to bring new ideas and different framings of different ideas which are important to our work as internal communicators and employee engagers. So what I wanted to do was to look at the concept of trust. Now, during the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things I noticed in a lot of organizations who were either struggling or doing well with hybrid and remote working was the level of trust that they had with their teams, whether they were able to let their teams get on with it and do their work, or whether they were trying to micromanage them. And trust is always something I think that we need to be aware of as internal communicators, whether we are working in an organization that has a lot of trust, where people do trust each other, or whether we're working in an organization that is inherently distrustful. And the impact that can have on how way our messages land and how receptive people are to them can be significant, as we're probably all aware. So In this episode, we're going to look at trust. We're going to dig into it in a lot more detail and understand what it is, because it's very easy, I think, for us to have a working definition of trust, or all have our own working definitions of trust, which aren't always the same. So we're going to look at trust, and we're going to explore that actually trust is not just an emotion; it's actually a neurological state, and it's actually a fundamental requirement that we all have as human beings to feel part of something, to feel part of a group, and to feel wanted and included within that group. So we're going to look at trust from that perspective, and we're going to look at it ultimately as the most important thing that we have in our organization, in terms of making sure that we're getting the best out of our individuals and teams within it. We're also going to look at something that I think is particularly relevant to internal communications, which is, are our communications geared towards individuals and talking about themselves or about their own team, or are they inclusive in terms of looking at the collective efforts of all of us? And our interviewee refers to this as I versus we type conversations and communications, and I think that for me was a real moment of realization. So I think you'll find that is something that resonates hopefully with you, and I should hopefully resonate with the type of work that you're doing. So this is what we're going to be looking at in this episode: the importance of trust, not only in internal comms. It's more applicable to, you know, a much broader area. It has a lot of applicability outside of just in internal comms, but specifically also in terms of its relevance to internal communications as well. So hope you find this a useful conversation. My guest today is Amy Wong. Amy is the founder of Always on Purpose. Amy is an executive leadership coach, author, and facilitator working with organizations such as Salesforce, Roku, LinkedIn, and many more. Amy's debut book, Living on Purpose, shows readers how to feel more connected to the people around them and feel truly satisfied by the life they're leading. With more than 20 years of experience, Amy has devoted herself to the study and practice of transformation. Amy is on a mission to raise the consciousness of the planet and help others to get off the proverbial hamster wheel, achieve peace of mind, and live with true intention. So, hello, Amy. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very good. It's the back end of my day, getting towards the end of my day, and I know it's nearly the beginning of yours, which leads me to the question: where in the world are you, Amy? Let's
Yeah,
position the pin on the map. Where are you?
that's right. So it is morning for me. I'm in Berkeley, California.
Wow,
Yeah,
excellent,
that's
fantastic. And you told me before we started it's a lovely day in California at the moment, yeah?
yeah. It tends to be a lovely day pretty much every day. So we're pretty
Fantastic.
lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. So I gave a very brief introduction there to your career and your work. Tell us a little bit more in your own words, Amy. What have you done and what are you up to now?
Yeah. Well, I've been coaching for over a decade, and it's been an amazing journey and being able to work with so many different types of folks. And I would say over the past 5, 6 years or so, I've really been heavily focused on leaders and teams working with corporations. And I partner with, executives, leaders, and teams on all things growth,
Mm,
transformation, and flow. And
mm,
really what we come in at with the entry point for almost everyone is the topic of communication. And that
mm,
really for me, communication, it is my passion. It's an area of expertise for me. And whether it's public speaking, team dynamics, interpersonal interaction dynamics, negotiation, pitching, really, it all comes down to sustaining trust. That's
mm.
my happy place. And so that's the entry point, and that's a lot of what I focus on
Yeah,
with people.
fantastic. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And when we originally spoke a few weeks ago, when we lined this interview up, you told me you used the words that trust is the ultimate currency in an organization. So let's start there then. So could you explain what we what we're talking about trust? I think we probably all have a working definition of trust, but what do we mean? And this idea of it being the ultimate currency. Could you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about that, Amy?
Yeah, I love how you framed up this question. And I'll start with, the word trust itself is, we all we understand what it is, but rarely do we get together and double click on it and be like, yeah, actually, what does this really mean? And
Mm,
so to have really a strong working definition here is going to be really important. Now, I'll get there after I share, the reason this is so important And I deliberately put a focus, a spotlight on this topic, trust,
Mm,
because rarely do we. We just assume that trust is kind of the byproduct of getting along, or hey, we've got this history, so there's trust here, or it's easy to talk to you, so there's trust, and we kind of take it for granted. And
mm,
the thing about that is that when you take a step back and you look at your life and you're like, okay, would I buy anything of significance from someone I didn't trust? Like,
mm,
no, I wouldn't.
no.
Would I share critical information with anyone I didn't trust? It's like, no, I wouldn't. And so the truth is, trust is like a currency that we are creating or eroding in our communication patterns. And
Mm,
trust isn't an emotion. You're right. It's a neurological state in which we are optimized for our greatest thinking, empathy, creativity, imagination, taking disparate ideas, bringing it together, solutions, taking risks, looking into the future optimistically. All of this stuff happens when we have, our brain is firing in optimal ways, our prefrontal cortex is online, our survival brain is quiet. Like, all of these things are possible. And so that's why trust feels so good when
mm,
when we have colleagues that we trust. It's like, oh yeah, it feels great. Well, it feels great because we're in these states of safety with one another. And
mm,
so what in terms of a working definition for trust, there's many ways we can define it. And an exercise I put a lot of people through is, I'll say, what are the first 5 words that come to mind when you think of the word trust? And
mm,
I'll have a team do it. And it's fascinating that it is wildly different for each person. I mean, you might have
mm,
words shared, but you'll never have that same set of words. So we all kind of have a different understanding of it. But for the
mm,
purpose of this conversation, I want to mention that, trust, that state of trust is truly it's a state in which we are feeling safe. We are
mm,
open, we are receptive. And so we can say that it's care, courage, and candor together that really creates trust. But what I like to focus on is this idea that we are safe. We
mm,
are seen. We feel like we belong. Okay, that is that state of trust. Okay, now that I'm there, I can do my best work with
mm,
you. And that's important because none of us do anything in a vacuum at all.
mm.
It's
Yeah.
all in relationship to one another.
It's really interesting as you're talking there. I'm kind of positioning. I mean, it's not that I'm an untrusting person. I trust a lot of people, but you kind of putting yourself into that state of high trust when you're with someone, and you kind of they've got your back. I'm not. And I don't mean it in a kind of an adversarial context, but it's really interesting when you think about that because it's like that. It's almost like that level of connection that you have with someone that
Mhm.
is that is really special because it's not like you know what each other's thinking or that sort of thing, but you just know that
Mhm.
you've got this. You can basically know they're going to do what they're meant to be doing, and you're doing what you're doing. And obviously, there's lots of analogies. I was watching I'm quite into motorsport, and I was watching
Mhm.
this with my son the other day, and we were watching these guys driving the rally cars, and the driver is so reliant on the navigator to give him or her the right instructions, and the navigator has basically got their life in the hands of this person who's holding the steering wheel. And it's just you think about the level of trust those people must have with
Mm.
each other. And I guess that's a really kind of intense and an organizational life. Sometimes feels like you're in a rally car, but not always. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And I kind of I guess you alluded to this when you were talking about trust. I'm going into this a little bit more detail, but this idea that I guess and it's kind of I guess it's a bit of a cliche to a certain extent, but it's true is that it takes a long time to build it, but not a long time. Not it can be destroyed very quickly.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is that your experience as well?
Uh,
Is it as simple as that?
You know, I've really been I really appreciate this question because it's something I've been chewing on. A lot of people, have a strong belief that it takes a long time to build, it's easy to break. And, I honestly, I think that really is a model that we hold dependent upon our life experiences and the
Mm,
beliefs we hold. Because I have found, just having studied this in the way that I have, and becoming certified in conversational intelligence and really diving into what this all is, now that I understand our neurobiology in the way that I do, I can't help but look out upon every individual and see truly a whole and complete individual being that
Mm.
desperately on a neurobiological level is seeking safety, belonging, and approval on
Mm.
a unconscious primal level. And when I look around and I recognize that, and I factor in, and this is such an important part of the conversation with trust, that the experience of rejection really is so triggering for us humans on really on an unconscious level, because our brains are looking out for social safety as much as they're looking out for environmental safety
Mm.
constantly. So to the
Mm.
brain, it can't differentiate, say, between a tiger jumping out of a bush at you and your colleague throwing you under the bus in a meeting. To the
Mm.
brain, it's the same. Those threats are the same. And you're like, well, that's interesting. Why is that? Well, because, we're hardwired for connection. We need one another to survive. And it really all
Mm.
starts as an infant, because what is life to an infant? Well, yeah, we think it's food, water, shelter. Actually, no, I mean, that will follow if mom or dad buy in. So, oh my gosh,
Mm.
really what death to the brain is rejection. And so
Mm.
when you factor that in and you look at this whole equation of trust and you're like, oh my gosh. So we're all we're all doing whatever we can to avoid rejection. So what is that? That's judgment, humiliation, not getting included, any form of that. All of us are doing that, and all of us want to belong. So when
Mm.
I look out in the world and I see folks, I just see a bunch of individuals with a bunch of survival mechanisms trying to get along and trying to be safe, and it's like, wow, okay, and we're
Mm.
stepping on each other's toes and we don't realize it. And so, for me, that statement, it takes a long time to build, and it's easy to break. I might have felt that way 10 years ago, but I definitely don't feel that now.
Mm. 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 Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good point. Yeah, and I guess the flip side of that is that sometimes we can use um our kind of biases and our prejudices to sort of trust some people rather than others, just on
Mhm.
initial impressions and initial reactions, and all kind of sort of all the kind of things that
Yeah.
we know we cognitively know that we shouldn't do, but the biases that we jump to again because of our kind of conditioning and our experiences, and
Yeah.
so I guess that yeah, it pays to, I guess, to not be kind of overly cautious about who you trust, but also not to test whether am I trusting this person because of who they are, or just because I've kind of jumped to a number of erroneous
Mhm.
conclusions, be based on my own kind of filtering
Mhm.
systems, I guess.
Right. And here's a
Mm,
fun fact. Our
mm,
brains are in less than 0.07 seconds. Our brains have labeled each other as friend or foe.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this is before we're even consciously aware of them. Our brain has
Mm,
already decided if they are safe or not. And and so really that's where the perception begins, is due to that assignment that is made by really our brain and body and all of it taking in these signals and then deciding if you're safe, and those signals can be, electromagnetic signal, it could be the
mm,
temperature, it could be the tonality that is that's emerging from this individual. It's like, oh, I don't know, that sounds, and we make these decisions, but that's unconscious to us. But those
mm,
decisions that are made, friend or foe, when we look over in their direction, that's going to absolutely influence what we now feel as we look in
mm,
their direction. It's like, oh,
mm,
I don't know about this person. And so there's so much about what you're saying here. Yeah,
mm,
it's fascinating. It's really,
mm,
I honestly
mm.
think it's just so fascinating.
It is, yeah. You mentioned earlier about trust not being an emotion, but being more of a
Hmm.
neurological state. We kind of explored that a little bit. I mean, do you want to say a little bit more about that,
Sure.
what the difference between the two is? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Absolutely. So, if there's two hormones that we talk about when we're talking about communication and trust, and
Mm,
the ones that really are important to focus on are either oxytocin or
mm,
cortisol. And so oxytocin, if you're familiar with this hormone, it's called the bonding hormone. It's the hormone that mom and baby are flooded with when baby is born.
mm,
It's essentially, it's beyond now the cuddling hormone. It's now been coined the trust hormone.
mm,
And what happens is when we are with one another and we feel safe, when we feel connected, when we feel synergistic, when it's that state of trust. What's synonymous with that is we get flooded with oxytocin. Oxytocin opens the prefrontal cortex. With that prefrontal cortex open, oh my gosh, there's so much possible. I can,
Mm.
I've got more creativity and imagination. So that's really what's going on. And so the that our conversational patterns, the ways in which we relate, are either going to upregulate oxytocin or cortisol. Now,
Mm.
cortisol, if you're familiar, this is the stress hormone. And,
Mm.
there's nothing
Mm.
wrong with cortisol. We need it. I mean, it's a necessary, beautiful part of our neurochemistry. And when we are relating with one another and we start to become protective, when we feel like we can't trust someone, when we don't understand, when we don't trust their intentions, when we don't feel safe with them, when we feel, when we are in patterns with one another where we become I-centric and protective, now we start upregulating cortisol. Now,
Mm.
cortisol is going to initiate that sort of fight or flight response. And so this is when, with cortisol in our systems, a handful of things happen. And so when there's a lot of cortisol being upregulated due to our interaction dynamics, then the job of cortisol, I mean, this is just wild to me. The job of cortisol
Mhm.
in that moment, in these interactions, is to mute your
Mm.
prefrontal cortex.
Mm.
So the job of cortisol is really to take the most brilliant part of your brain and take it offline.
Mm.
And it's like, well, that's unfortunate because now if I'm getting in a heated conversation with you, like, we say like can't figure out what to, and we feel like we're not
Mm.
quite sure what to say, and it's simply because this cortisol is muting that brilliant part of our brain. Now you have to wonder, well, why is that evolutionarily? Like, why does that happen? Well, if you think about it, because the brain can't differentiate if it's you're being threatened either by this individual who isn't letting you get a word in edgewise
Mm.
versus a tiger
Mm.
coming out from behind the bush. The brain's like, "Oh, okay, you know you really don't have time to brainstorm your way out of this.
Yeah.
So we're going
Yeah.
to shut that part of your brain down, and we're going to channel all your resources to your extremities so you can get out of there." And
And
so
run
that's
away.
why,
Mm.
so with cortisol, we end up in these suboptimal states where we can't be
Mm.
objective, we can't be empathetic, we can't have perspective, we can't, you know, solution and be, it's just, we become very myopic. And with that
Mm.
cortisol in your system, it's like red glasses. And so now as you look out around you, everything feels a little more threatening. And
Mm.
so that's what's going on in conversation. And so one thing to consider is that every conversation that we're having back and forth, these conversations are serving up these neurochemical cocktails, and they're either, lots of oxytocin or it's lots of cortisol. And a lot of the case, we're getting cocktails with both of them, both
Mm.
oxytocin and cortisol. And when we have a cocktail like that due to our interaction dynamic, that's just simply uncertainty. That's
Mm.
when you're with someone and you're like, I don't know. Do they really have my back?
Mm.
Are they really thinking about my best interest? And so that sense of uncertainty really is conditional trust. And it's really
Mm.
just due to the neurochemical makeup that's being upregulated as a result of how we're relating with one another.
Mm. Mm. Very interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love. Again, I'm like you. I love this kind of brain chemistry, brain science stuff. It fascinates me.
Hmm.
Just kind of getting now into maybe some of the sort of practical. I mean, not that what we've been talking about is impractical, but I wanted to explore what builds trust, what damages it, and again, maybe more on a kind of macro level, but
Yeah.
also, we're talking about internal communication. I want to link this to internal
Yes.
communications. What are some of the things that I guess individually or corporately or culturally, sometimes we do from an internal comms perspective that foster
Hmm.
trust, but also the things
Hmm.
that can kind of make us feel like there's a tiger about to jump out of the bush at us.
Yeah.
So maybe we address the sort of building and damaging trust from an organizational perspective first, and then maybe look at the role of comms
Yeah.
in that. Mm.
Absolutely. So
Mm.
I'm going to try to break this down and make it super simple. And I'll describe this kind of as a spectrum.
Mm.
And on one end of the spectrum, you can have a very I-centric stance, meaning I am totally coming from my own point of view. It's all about me. It's my point of view. And I have absolutely no awareness of you as a human on the other side of this conversation.
Mm.
So as I say, I-centric, naturally, I think you can kind of imagine what that would feel like if you were very I-centric in this conversation.
Mm,
It's like you're very guarded, you're very protective. It's just there is no awareness of the other. Okay, so
mm,
that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is a very we-centric stance, where it's not about my success, it's about our success. It's very
mm,
co-creative, it's very generative, it is very, and we're talking about, and we're seeking a shared reality together versus my reality, right?
mm,
And so if you can kind of think of this spectrum where you're going from either extremely I-centric to extremely we-centric, all of our conversations are going to fall somewhere and very fluidly fall in and out,
mm.
like within this spectrum. And what breaks trust is when we stay I-centric for too long. Now,
Right.
why? Because if we're I-centric, the other person's brain is very much picking up on the fact that we are not at all aware of them as a human. So
Mm,
therefore, are they safe? I don't know. That brain's like, I don't know if I'm safe because they're totally unaware of me. Do I belong?
mm,
I don't know because they're not making it about me. Am I being seen? Absolutely not, because they're making it about that. So it's that when we stay in I-centric, very transactional conversations, very transactional, just focusing on the thing and not each other, we start to create cortisol. That cortisol is essentially, that's distrust. So now we've got distrust. And if we stay there for too long, we're now going to start to come up with these conclusions that these people aren't safe, it's hard to do work. And
mm,
then I'm sure you can imagine you start to create these somewhat toxic cultures, and it's not that because the people are bad, it's just that the interaction dynamics are not optimal because everyone's being too I-centric. So what
mm,
do? You have to become more we-centric, where it's not just my success, it's our success.
mm,
It's instead of listening to confirm, instead of listening to be right, we're actually going to listen to connect with one another, listen to discover something new versus listen to defend a point of view. And so it's all these little things that we're doing that's either signaling that we're I-centric or we-centric. And so the more we
mm,
can be we-centric, the more oxytocin, the more trust, the more generativity and creativity and innovation that we can have. But here's the thing. We don't want to be we-centric all the time because we won't get anything done. So it's
mm.
not
Yeah.
like, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a very fluid dance that we have to mind. And so we want to kind of play this game. And I say it's a game because it's fun, but we want to play this game just really based upon how we feel and how we're gauging, like how we're doing, right? And if it's feeling generative and creative and empowered, and then keep going. But if it's feeling stuck and you're hesitant and there's frustration and there's anxiety, chances are it's going to be due to some pretty I-centric stances that are going on that could probably
Mm.
be, molded into a different way of being.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I don't like the thought of not being, feeling as though I'm talking to someone who's eccentric, because I guess I'm thinking of kind of a couple of experiences I've had of that, which is one, the kind of classic thing where you go to a networking event with the intention of obviously meeting people and finding out about them, and you come up against the person who just drones on. You kind of go up to them and say, hey, hi, I'm Craig. What do you do? And all they do is just talk about themselves and
Yeah.
themselves and themselves, and you're kind of thinking, this is really interesting. I'm waiting for the bit where you're going to kind of, reciprocate, and be, you think, actually, I can't be bothered. I get to the point where I think, you know what, I'm going to go and get another drink or something, and so that's one example of that. And you kind of see that,
Hmm.
and I guess what we're talking about here, it kind of boils down to, a lot of this boils down to, the principles of emotional intelligence and
Yeah,
self-awareness
that's
and
right.
connecting and empathy and that sort of thing. But I guess the other example of this is, I do this, there's this thing in the UK which I think is in the States, but it's really popular in the UK. It's this kind of, every Saturday there's a free 5k run, and it's like a big community. Everybody, it's free, people volunteer to help out and do it. And I do these, just because I travel around a lot, I do them. They're all over the country, and I follow I tend to, if I go, I know I'm going to one of these runs, and there's hundreds of them all over the place. I kind of follow their Facebook page, and all it seems they do on the Facebook page is talk about their own little group of people who turn up every week, and they never talk about
Mm.
people who visit and come from, elsewhere. And I go to
Mm.
these things, and you kind of stand
Mhm.
there, you don't know anybody, and you feel a bit like kind of, the sort of, you've turned up at someone else's party, and with no friends, and you get, you're not there for that. You are there for that, to a certain element of connection, but you're there to, get
Sure,
your 5K fix in. But
sure.
but it's really interesting, because I know I often think, well, rather than talking about yourselves, why don't you talk about the people who've traveled to come and, take part in
Yeah,
your event? And
yeah,
and I'd never thought about it in those terms, but it's the I
yeah,
versus we that you've just talked about there.
yeah,
And I
that's
guess
I love
that's the
that.
ultimate in sort of, like you were saying earlier, is rejection, and not
Yeah,
feeling part of the clan and the group, and connected to that little sort of group, does make you feel the ultimate in lack of,
yeah,
not feeling unloved, and feeling as though you don't really trust the
yeah,
people you're with. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, it's I love that you I mean, what a great kinda connection here around this,
Mm,
and, it's what I love sharing with folks that I'm working with is to
mm,
just really break this down.
mm,
When you think about the brain and this incredible body that we are in and how everything fires and wire like it's all working together to not only just keep us alive, but in order for us to really thrive in this existence, our brain is constantly trying to keep us alive. And in
mm,
addition to doing a lot of other things. So essentially it's trying to keep you safe. And what it's doing is it's constantly reading the environment. And if we were to translate how it's keeping you safe in every single moment of your life, and we were to translate the way it's doing it into three verbal questions, it would be this. So in every moment, the brain's going, are you safe? Are you safe? Do you
mm,
need to protect yourself? Are you safe? Are you safe? Are you safe right now? Are you safe? Are you safe? And it's not just safety from people with sharp knives, right? It's
mm,
safety like in terms of image and status and reputation. Are you safe? Are you safe? Are you safe? Am I, so that's the first question. The second question that's always running is, do I belong? Do I fit in? Do I
mm,
belong? Am I a part of a we? Am I a part of a we? And so that's constantly running at the same time. And then additionally, the other question that's running constantly is, am I being seen? Am I being seen? Am I being valued? Am I being acknowledged?
mm,
Am I being heard? Is the I that makes up this we, is that being valued? And
mm,
so these three questions are running constantly. And
mm,
doesn't that just feel familiar? I mean,
mm,
when you're out and about, it's kind of like yeah, you're like that's what it means to be human. And so anytime one of those three questions gets toggled to the no, we get kind of triggered. And that's
mm,
when cortisol is going to emerge. So no doubt, here you go and you visit these groups and they're not your
mm,
group
mm,
and that oh gosh, I don't know if I belong, I don't think I belong, and that feeling of not belonging is going to create a little bit of cortisol, which is going to create the
mm,
anxiety, which is going to create the discomfort. And
mm,
we manage this as humans. We're like, I'll rationalize this, I'll use my powers of logic to get through this, and we do. But just to make the invisible visible here about what's going on under the hood, this is really
mm,
this is what's driving us
mm,
all the time.
mm. Yeah, and I guess just and it's a combination of what you just said and what I was saying before, and I guess when you talk about I versus we, the I
Mhm.
isn't just necessarily an individual. The I could be a team with, the I could be, and I see this in organizations where, there's maybe one department that hogs the line. They're all it's all, and in that context, it's the sorry, I'm getting my kind of tenses mixed up here, but they're talking about themselves as an I.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
what I've done, this as a collective, and at the expense and the tone deafness to actually to the we, which is the,
Yeah.
maybe, well, yeah, that's great, but you couldn't have done that without our help, and we're kind of maybe the
Mm.
unsung heroes here, and and
Mhm.
and and so teams, or and sometimes leadership teams that, all they talk about is the stuff that's I related, as in what we think is important, what's important to us, rather than recognizing actually there is a bit of plurality in our organization, and actually other people may have other priorities, and it's important that
Mm.
we respect them as well.
Mm.
Never really thought about it like that, but it's really,
That's
really, yeah.
powerful. Mhm. Like the
Great.
many dimensions of
Yeah,
I's and
yeah.
we's here, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they're like the kind of the I guess, if you're a Star Trek fan, the Borg, it's like the collective, it's the the hive
Mhm.
brain sometimes is can act in a singular context, it can be that's the sort of the I, and not just individuals within it. I just
That's
want to
right.
just as just as we sort of move towards the closing and sort of wrapping up. I just want to talk to you a little bit about hybrid and remote, because obviously I at the beginning, I'd worked at home for 13 years when COVID descended. So for me, it was like, what's the big deal? I mean, obviously a global pandemic,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
for me, it was like, why are people getting so het up about having to go and work from their and obviously after 13 years, I've kind of got used to it and was set up for it. But
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
big thing that came out for me was the organizations that did it really, really well, and the ones who kind of just spent months running into the same brick walls, came down ultimately to trust. It came down to, am I comfortable letting go of being able to see what my people are doing and just
Mhm.
trusting them to, for me to set them and point them in the right direction and say, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I trust you to just do it and get on with it, and come to me if there's anything you need that I can help you do that, versus the
Mhm.
people who kind of, white knuckle, trying to prize their grip away from trying to micromanage people, which was just
Mhm.
impossible. And they couldn't actually see what they were doing, and they just had to, and lots of stress and grief. So that's my take on trust in the kind of pandemic hybrid
Mm.
remote, and as we come out of that now, which is obviously we're likely to that's here to stay now. What are your thoughts on
Mm.
the trust and the
Yeah.
impact of that, and linked to some of the stuff we've been talking about, Amy?
No, yeah. No, I really appreciate that frame around trust at that level, because when I think about a hybrid and a remote work environment,
Mm,
I'm really largely thinking about the ways in which folks are relating with one another, and how is it
mm,
that they're communicating with one another,
mm,
and what's what can be done really well and what can be done really poorly is
mhm,
sustaining trust via our remote communication, right? So, because what used to be the case is we'd all be in an office and we'd be at our desks, but often we're up and we're moving around, and so we bump into each other in the hallway, we run into each other in at lunch, and so it's in those casual exchanges that we naturally are feeding our connections, and
mm,
largely, and just by nature of being in person, and it being more casual, it's very likely we're going to have more transformational conversations, and that are more we centric, that are more personal, that really feed and nourish the that upregulation of oxytocin. And so when
mm,
you have a high trust culture, you can imagine then that you get a lot more done, right? And so if you look at any culture, work culture, that's extremely productive and extremely um, just successful, it's very much due to the fact that there's a tremendous amount of trust in the culture. Now, that trust again is created or eroded in how we're communicating with one another, and it's very fluid. It's ebbing and it's flowing. And so when you look at how now, it's like when we look at, okay, well, now we're remote and we don't have those opportunities, so we have to hop on a Zoom call. It's very likely that we're just going to become very transactional. Okay, well, let's just talk about
mm,
the work. Let's just get stuff done. And now, when you introduce things like Slack, and we're now relying heavily on linear based text, which is devoid of tone and body language, that really transmits the feeling and the intention and the meaning more than just that linear packet of information that's spat out through a word. Things are going to get misinterpreted. We're going to start to be a bit more protective. And so, it's very likely that we're going to create more distrust, not because
mm,
people aren't trustworthy, it's just due to the interaction dynamics. So if we're going to do hybrid and remote work well, we have to be so conscientious about how it is that we are communicating via Zoom, via Slack, via email, and
mm,
ensuring that we are signaling safety, that we are signaling, hey, that I care about you as a human. We have to be very mindful that the impact that we're having on others is one that's signaling safety, belonging, and, and being seen.
mm,
And if and without that, again, it's that work that culture is going to suffer. So
mm,
that's how I tend to
mm.
think about it.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's very interesting, and we recorded it, and it'll be going out a couple of episodes before yours. I had a conversation with Joanna Parsons about the remote working remotely, and very it's interesting, very similar conversation but different perspectives. So if anyone's listening to this and hasn't listened to that episode, the episode that went out on the a couple of episodes ago, the episode 2 of this series, I'd recommend that they maybe have a listen to that. And if this is something that they're interested in, this, because remote is obviously on everybody's lips at the moment, from a kind of working and hybrid and trying to find ways to make it work. And I think that's a really interesting angle on that, Amy. I want to wrap up anyway, just to sort of bring things to a conclusion. Any final thoughts? I mean, you've been really generous with what you've shared there, and some real, kind of epiphanies for me, in terms of trust. Anything you want to kind of just sort of finish off on them? Anything you wanted to just say that we've just had a chance to talk about in the questions that
Yeah.
I've asked? Yeah.
Yeah, my mind immediately goes to, if anyone's listening to this, they might be thinking, "Yeah, this is great, but what can I go do? What can I do to
Yeah.
actually
Absolutely.
create trust quickly and actually improve the quality of my conversations?" And I would say, you know, just two things: keeping in mind this idea that there's a spectrum between I-centric and we-centric, and being
Mm,
intentional about being as we-centric as possible, because remember, everybody's brain is craving that sense of safety, belonging, and approval. So the more we
mm,
can be we-centric via just with the intention of doing that, it's amazing how the dynamic will shift. So that's one thing.
mm,
The
mm,
second thing is really minding, take just notice the type of listening that you bring to a conversation, because it's the kind of listening that's really going to determine if we're I-centric or we-centric.
mm,
And most often we're listening to confirm, we're listening to defend, we're listening to prove, we're listening to validate, which it's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're stuck in a conversation and you change your listening to connect.
mm.
When you find yourself, and this is great, by the way, phenomenal to do with spouses and your children. Just check this out. If you find yourself in a tiff, if you find yourself in a lockjam, just
Mm,
shift your listening to connect with the other person. And what's phenomenal is just in that intention and that literal shift in your own listening, the dynamic changes immediately, because remember, the other person's brain is craving that being seen and being
mm,
safe. And when
mm,
you shift to listening to connect, you're essentially signaling all of that. Hey, you're safe, you belong, and you're seen.
mm.
Right. And so it's very, very powerful.
And I guess that links to the fact that it's not just about what's coming out of our mouths; it's our whole person, isn't it? That's listening, and that what you're
Mhm.
advocating there is that we shift that from kind of to show that we're trying to make that connection, we're trying to reach out, we're trying to understand what it is that you're trying to say, or what your point is, and rather than just kind of
Yeah.
going through the motions of nodding and all the body language stuff we've been trained to do to show that we're listening.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Mm,
exactly right. Yeah.
mm,
And all of
mm,
this, that I'm sharing is largely due to the just tremendous framework of what's called conversational intelligence, which
mm,
was founded by Judith Glaser a while back. Sadly, we lost her to cancer in 2018. But
mm.
if anybody's interested, go look into it. Conversational intelligence.
Okay.
It's very, very powerful.
Okay, excellent. Well, that kind of brings me to what I was going to sort of talk about, which is any links that we can put into the show notes. So maybe if you could send me, if there's a kind of go-to resource for that would
Sure.
be great. Yeah, yeah. I was going to put your LinkedIn profile into the show notes, so hopefully that's okay with you. If anyone wants to
Yes.
reach out and connect with you, are there any other links you'd like me to put into the notes,
Absolutely.
Amy? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So lots of stuff on conversational intelligence on my website. So the
Yeah.
best place to go is probably my website, which is alwaysonpurpose.com.
Always alwaysonpurpose.com. Well, if you can, and again, I'll if you can maybe send me those links through, and I'll drop them into the show notes for the episode, which will be on our website, and also I think they
Mhm.
show up on iTunes as well. So,
That's right.
um, yeah,
Yeah, and the
cool,
other thing I would
excellent.
say too is
Mm,
in the book that I wrote was living on purpose. And so I don't overtly talk about communication, but really that communication is a symptom of the deeper stuff. So the book, Living on Purpose, addresses
yeah.
all that
Well,
deeper
maybe
stuff. Yeah.
maybe you can put a link into where what best
Sure.
way to get a hold of that, and then as a happy to do that in return for your
Perfect.
generosity of giving you your time today. So that'll be brilliant, Amy. So look, that's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed that. It's very very thought provoking. I think again, as I said right at the beginning, I think trust is a kind, and then you alluded to it. You know that we've all got multiple definitions of trust, and you kind of it's like any of these words, isn't it? You kind of get people to write down their what they think it means, and you'll get like a normal distribution curve of some really weird things that people think it means, and then there may be a bit of overlap in the middle. But yeah, it's one of those things that we talk about a lot, but never really actually take some time to sort of unpick. And I think you've done a fantastic job with that. And the thing that's really resonated for me was this sort of I we thing, and it really kind of, as you probably recognize from the two stories that
Mhm.
it drew out in my mind. It's something that I think
Yeah.
definitely from internal communications perspective is something we should maybe doing the I we test. And
Mhm.
yeah,
I like that. Yeah, the
brilliant.
IV
Well,
test.
all right, Amy. Well, look, it's been fantastic speaking to you. Thank you so much,
Likewise.
and I look forward to maybe speaking with you at some point in the future, and talking about this topic from maybe a different angle as well.
Oh, I'd love that. Yes. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.